Silverwolf is Star Rail's best debuffer, and today I'm going to show you how to build them. If you aren't familiar with her already, Silverwolf is Honkai's newest released character who boasts being Quantum, a debuffer, and potentially a damage dealer. I know you guys are probably wondering if she's worth pulling for, especially since Luocha is on the horizon, but seriously guys, how are we going to ignore this or this? Let's get into it. Now before we start, I do want to fill you guys in on a few changes to Silverwolf that Hoyoverse made before her release. These adjustments really altered the way that I viewed Silverwolf since it provides her extra leniency stat-wise. What I mean by this is that her Eidolons and skills previously slotted her as a pure debuffer with no room to do damage, but recent changes to her kit have shown large increases to her skill damage. With this in mind, there are two different approaches to playing Silverwolf. If you're running damage dealer Silverwolf while having enough effect hit rate to debuff, more on this later, here's the plan. Silverwolf does more damage when there are more debuffs on the enemy, so assuming you have her own light cone, you ideally want to use her skill to start, wait for any others to land their debuffs, and top it off with her ultimate. I know this sounds pretty simple, but that's because it is. Another thing to keep in mind is that following her first turn of combat, she constantly has debuffs rolling. So this makes accomplishing her game plan even easier. Keep uptime on debuffs, spam her skill, profit off a huge ultimate that deals big damage, and you're good to go. If you're looking to play her as a pure debuffer, her game plan is pretty similar, with the only caveat being that you need to line up this with this. The first debuff comes from her skill and the second comes from her ultimate. Lining this up with your DPS is important, but can be challenging since you can't cast your ultimate turn 1 without being hit. With that in mind, you can choose to roll the dice and see if you get hit, or you can just use her skill turn 1 and make use of the reduced defense next turn. Choosing the right light cone for Silverwolf comes down to the playstyle you choose, but her own, well, if you manage to pull it, Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat, and the other Silverwolf light cone work well. A common trait shared by all these selections is the added effect hit rate, and this makes sense since, at worst, you need around 100 effect hit rate in order to consistently land all of her debuffs. This number goes down if you remove outliers like Cocolia or exceptionally high resistance bosses, so keep that in mind when deciding on how much effect hit rate you need on Silverwolf. Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat is definitely the most valuable since you effectively add a mini defense reduction, but before the tutorial mission starts is free and still provides effect hit rate. Something that does feel a bit awkward or unfortunate is that if you want to play Silverwolf properly as a damage dealer, you really need to commit to getting her light cone or be lucky enough to get welts. Bad advice, I know. Good Night and Sleep Well is an okay secondary option should you decide to really force a damage dealing playstyle, but it pales in comparison to the free crit rate and increased damage from Silverwolf's light cone, or the attack and damage increase that Welt's light cone provides. For full transparency, I do admit that this has felt like one of the few moments in Honkai Star Rail where a playstyle or build appears make or break based on whether you have a light cone. Luckily, however, she will do fine as either build, so that's not much of a problem. And once again, we have arrived at the gates of hell with traces. And like I mentioned before, there are two ways to approach the investment of your traces for Silverwolf. The first is as a damage dealer, where you need to max all of her traces, but with priority on her skill, followed by her ultimate, the bonus stats scattered throughout the tree, and then her talent. But as with all DPS, maxing her traces is important for squeezing out every ounce of damage in her kit. Silverwolf does the most amount of damage with her ultimate after landing debuffs with her skill, but you will be primarily spamming her skill, so that should take priority. If we scoot on over to the debuff supported build, this character really only needs to focus on upgrading her skill, talent, and ultimate, followed by any defensive traces that are on the tree. As long as she doesn't die, focusing on upgrading the chances of landing debuffs or the amount of defense she shreds is peak value. Something that I also mentioned with other supports is that since traces are so costly, deciding to ignore certain upgrades on the trace tree when using Silverwolf is totally acceptable. If you need to upgrade a damage dealer's traces, or if you need to use the energy elsewhere, this is not the character to max, especially when building her like a support. The perfect relic set on Silverwolf can be really tricky since it depends more on how your relics roll. For damage dealing Silverwolf, Quantum is the clear winner, but a point of contention when it comes to reaching the effect hit rate threshold is what planar set or main stat you need to reach it. At base, Silverwolf has 18 effect hit rate from her traces and can receive anywhere from 24 to 40 additional hit rate depending on your light cone. With this in mind, if you're trying to reach 100, Pan Galactic Commercial Enterprise's extra 10 effect hit rate lands you at needing around 50 additional effect hit rate. How you arrive at this number, however, is entirely up to you and will unfortunately depend on the rolls that come with your relics. The other upside to having 100 effect hit rate is the fact that you will gain 25% attack and beat out Space Sealing Station as her best in slot damage dealing planar set. I should mention though that her second Eidolon reduces the effect res of enemies down to 80, dramatically changing the viability of this set, but more on that later. With the debuff for Silverwolf route, Running Musketeer as her set is great, while having Eagle of Twilight Line for the additional forward advance on ultimate helps when spamming it on cooldown. The Thief of Shooting Meteor set is also an option should you decide to further the quantum breaking effect on an enemy, and Quantum as an element pushes back, which makes the set equally as viable if you choose to run it on support Silverwolf. All three sets have moments to shine, and therefore choosing which you have access to is perfectly fine for this playstyle. When it comes to a supported planar set, Fleet of the Ageless unsurprisingly re-arrives as the leading set since you want to buff your DPS's damage. As always, the added HP percent is also nice since many of the non-preservation or abundance characters suffer from having lower defensive base stats. Although I typically end the recommendations here, if you recall, I did mention that Silverwolf is unable to use her ultimate and skill on the first turn. A solution to this would be using Sprightly One Walk since it gives energy and lets your Silverwolf take her turn ahead of your DPS. This set is decently niche though, since you would have to farm this alongside the break effect set, which can ultimately feel energy inefficient. In terms of main stats, here's what you're looking for with DPS Silverwolf. For her chest, the main stat is pretty dependent on what you're missing, but effect hit rate, or crit damage are vital. Her boot can be attack or speed, but this is more dependent on your team makeup. In general, keep it speed. Silverwolf's best planar sphere as a damage dealer is Quantum, and her rope should be attack, which makes sense since she's just a damage dealer in this case. Energy regeneration could be worthwhile if you're looking to spam her ultimate, but losing out on the attack percent can drop DPS, especially on her skill. With how important landing debuffs is to her kit, Silverwolf's priority is pretty mixed since she absolutely needs to land debuffs to do damage. Reaching the threshold to inflict debuffs on your opponent is priority number 1, with crit rate and damage following close behind. Speed and equal are attack since you need both attack to do damage, duh, and need speed to take more turns, double duh. With Silverwolf's effect hit rate playstyle, the build is much more straightforward and less role dependent. An effect hit rate chest to easily hit the 100 threshold, followed by speed boots, an energy regen rope, and an HP percent planar sphere is standard. This build plays very similar to that of Pela or any other supportive character since you just want to take more turns and debuff without dying. Most defensive main and substats will work so long as they allow you to live and debuff the enemy. The effect hit rate chest is the only piece that would be difficult to replace should you decide to opt for an HP or defense percent main, since you need at least 100 to debuff the enemy. If you keep that in mind, however, building this style of Silverwolf should be much easier. Oh boy, another conversation about a 5 stars Eidolons. If it weren't already clear from me mentioning her Eidolons easing the effect hit rate you need, they are pretty broken. And if we head straight into it, you'll notice that her first Eidolon grants 7 energy per debuff that the enemy has with a limit of 5 instances. This translates to a max of 35 energy assuming you hit a character who you have previously used your skill on and are able to find the other debuffs through her ultimate or potentially an ally or a basic attack. The energy gained itself is already ridiculous value when it comes to cycling and increased ultimate usage, but this pales in comparison to the next Eidolon. Silverwolf's second Eidolon reduces all enemies' effect resistance by 20% the second combat begins. Let me be perfectly clear, this is one of the most game-changing Eidolons that Hoyoverse has ever released. 20% free stat may not seem like a lot, but when you consider that this affects all allies' ability to debuff in addition to the stat relief that you provide Silverwolf, it paints a much more insane picture. Once again, a character's third and fifth Eidolons always prove to be valuable since they are foundational upgrades to the character's skill and kit, but once we start to venture into E4 and E6 territory, everything changes. Silverwolf's fourth Eidolon provides her additional quantum damage per debuff on the enemy with her ultimate that scales with her attack. This effect can be triggered up to 5 times, which further adds to the insanity of her damage. And if that wasn't enough, her sixth Eidolon outright states that the raw damage of her ultimate increases by up to 100%, depending on how many debuffs she has on the enemy. That's just it, guys. An extra 100%, no big deal. Pridewind shows that she does more damage than Seele at E6. As a final note on this section, it's clear that Hoyoverse designed some aspect of Silverwolf to be a DPS simply based off of her Eidolons, so don't be surprised when she blows up everything on sight. Anyway, when it comes to team compositions, there are plenty of combinations that can slot Silverwolf to great success. I will include a few teams that are free to play and a few that involve more investment or luck. The first team that works well if you're looking to make Silverwolf a DPS is a team involving Asta, Natasha, and the Fire Trailblazer. Trying to make full use of Silverwolf's element weakness feature is pretty difficult when you're trying to run her as a DPS, but this team allows you to have decent turn taking with Asta's speed buff while also providing a chance to make enemies weak to fire. Asta is notorious for being a great weakness breaker with her skill, and the added attack increase from her passive really glues the team together. add a tank and healer who can cleanse, and there you have it, a free-to-play team who has enough speed, damage, and tankiness to survive even the toughest encounters. The second team that works well if you're limited on characters is another combo that involves fire. Hook, the Fire Trailblazer, Asta, and Silverwolf do exceptionally well, especially if survivability is not an issue. This team guarantees fire elemental weakness if the team is already weak to quantum, and seriously, it breaks the enemy over and over and over and over. Hook, as the star damage dealer here, is supported by Asta's speed and attack increases alongside Silverwolf's defense reduction and the ability to make any enemy weak to fire. Pair this with the constant provoking and shielding of the Fire Trailblazer, and suddenly you have a whole team exhausted and on life support. But before we move on to the more unrestricted team compositions, I do want to make clear that Silverwolf truly is versatile enough to be slotted in anytime you need a supportive character. So even if you don't guarantee landing the element you want, she still has her defense reduction and the potential to eventually land the element. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the real big brain ridiculous team comps. Slotting Silverwolf in as the solo DPS within the Tingyun Bronya composition works wonders since she can abuse Bronya's turn giving. Pair this with Tingyun and you have an unstoppable machine that shreds defense by herself while also making use of the attack, damage, and crit damage buffs from Tingyun and Bronya. If opting into the supportive route, a team revolving around Lightning can work super well at the moment. Tingyun, Jingyuan, and Bailu complemented by Silverwolf can really make use of the element weakness feature in Silverwolf's kit, and that isn't even taking into consideration how ridiculous the Lightning Lord attacking a defense reduced enemy would be. Factor in the attack increase from Tingyun's skill, and suddenly you're doing a quadrillion damage to everyone on the enemy team. Bailu adds value as the panic button should things go south, but this team really flies off the rails once the Lightning Lord hits a defense reduced enemy. I know a question that everyone will also be asking is how good Seele and Silverwolf are together, but honestly having to take Qingcui or QQ as a secondary DPS really disrupts the flow of this team. If we're simply using Silverwolf for her defense and all resistance reduction, while praying that we land Quantum however, this team should go to the moon. Similar to how Pela dramatically boosts the damage of Yanqing with her ultimate and skill after having the 4th Eidolon, Silverwolf does the same but better in every single regard. The defense reduction amount is increased, the reduction in element resistance is increased, and honestly if I had to justify it any further, Pela only reduces ice resistance. So to summarize, Silverwolf is pretty damn flexible in any and all content with 2 completely different builds. As you can see though guys, Silverwolf is a pretty ridiculous character, she has great functionality as a support and surprising damage as a DPS. Silverwolf is a 5-star though, so I get that it hurts to pull for both her and the Light Cone, but the two feel extremely powerful when combined. If you aren't looking to use her as a damage dealer, don't worry since she works on very little. But as always guys, that's everything you need to know when it comes to Silverwolf. I'm still kind of reeling from how much damage she actually does, and I will be testing her on my Twitch channel that you can see here, but be sure to check out my socials, Twitter, Discord, all that good stuff. And if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to like, turn on the notification bell, comment below what you thought about Silverwolf, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one though guys. Thanks for watching.